What would Steve Jobs do? There's been a lot of conjecture over the years, but the answers might surprise you. It's been 8 years almost to the day since Steve Jobs died on October 5th, 2011, and since that time there's been a lot of conjecture and infighting about what he would or wouldn't have approved of. The conventional wisdom is that he would have rejected a lot of what's happened: larger iPhones, the notch, removing the headphone jack, the Apple Watch, the direction of the iPad, the various Mac lines and how they've developed or not developed. A lot of people say, well, we just couldn't know. He's not around to weigh in, so, how are we supposed to figure that out? But it turns out that that's not exactly true. During the Samsung Apple lawsuits of a few years ago, a lot of internal info came to light as exhibits in those legal proceedings. And one that I just came across recently was an email Jobs sent on October 24th, 2010, entitled Top 100A. It's an outline for a strategy meeting, and what it contains really kind of surprised me. I'll post the link to it down in the description below so you guys can read it for yourself, but I'm going to go through some of the highlights. The Top 100 is a group of folks at Apple who would meet for 3 days to discuss strategy with Steve Jobs, undisclosed location, super secret, blah, 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 blah. The first rule about Top 100 is you don't talk about Top 100. But this email gives us a really interesting view into what Jobs was thinking 12 months before his death about the direction of Apple, and I think a lot of its content is going to surprise a lot of people. The email lays out topics for discussion around nearly every facet of Apple's business, starting with topic 1 under the heading 2011 strategy. The first bullet point, who are we? And later in that list, what do we do? These were the main questions being asked at the time. As that section continues, the topic turns to what Jobs called the post-PC era. Under that heading, the topics included transition of the PC as a hub for all your digital assets, contacts, calendars, bookmarks, photos, music, videos, and more, to a model of a more cloud-based digital hub. One bullet reads that the PC is now just another client alongside iPhone, iPad, iPod Touch. And following that statement, Steve Jobs issued kind of a warning that Apple is in danger of hanging on to the old paradigm too long. This is what he referred to as the innovator's dilemma, which seems to reflect a concern that Apple could be too slow to the transition between the old paradigm of the desktop PC as the hub and the new, with the mobile device being all over the place. How has that worked out in the years since? Well, Apple has built a pretty incredible infrastructure that has somewhat decentralized the PC as the repository of everything to a more cloud-based system that integrates just about everything really well. There's the much discussed ecosystem, which was only in its infancy when Jobs was alive. Apple still lags behind Google and others in cloud-based storage of materials other than photos and videos, but iCloud over the years has slowly gotten better. Later, in section 3 of the email, Jobs starts to discuss the iPhone. The first bullet in the list reads, plus iPhone 4 with better antenna, processor, camera, and software to stay ahead of the competition until mid-2012. The mention of a plus iPhone 4 seems to refer to maybe a larger version of the phone, which would debunk the long-standing opinion of many that had Jobs lived, we would have continued to see 3.5-inch iPhone screens. He mentions the competition several times and seems to be acutely aware of Apple's need to stay out in front of Google in particular. Later, when discussing iOS, Jobs even referenced the need to catch up to Android, where we are behind notifications, tethering speech, and leapfrog them. Siri, comma, ... It's interesting to read this with the benefit of knowing what's happened in the ensuing 9 years after this was written. Apple has improved in these areas since 2010, but it's safe to say that Google still has the lead. Siri had and still has a huge potential, but at this point, it lags behind both Google's Assistant and Alexa. Considering the head start that Apple had with Siri, it's clear that Jobs saw the potential, but since his death, that potential has not been satisfactorily realized. If he had lived even a few years longer, would Apple have dug deeper into developing Siri? It's hard to say, but it's clear that he saw Siri as a way to get out ahead of the competition, and that just hasn't happened. When it comes to the iPad, the 2011 strategy was ship iPad 2 with amazing hardware and software before our competitors even catch up with the current model. There's also spot in there for demos of iMovie, GarageBand, a textbook authoring system, and a bunch more. It's important to note that the first iPad had only hit shelves about 6 months before this meeting. Jobs was already focusing on corporate adoption of the iPad, as well as broadening its use cases so early in its lifespan. While nothing about the future of the iPad beyond the iPad 3 is in this outline, Jobs' recognition of the post-PC era earlier shows that he was thinking beyond the desktop-laptop paradigm. In fact, when he discusses Mac hardware later in the email, there's no mention of laptops at all. Could it be that Jobs saw the iPad as the mobile computer of the future? Apple has pushed this idea over the years, and with the iPad Pro line, it has gotten close. The power is definitely there, but the iPads are still hindered by the operating system. iPad OS is a huge step forward, but the iPad has yet to supplant MacBooks and iMacs and that kind of thing as the computing solutions Jobs likely envisioned. It's true that even given the limitations of the operating system, many people can and do use the iPad as their one and only computer, but I feel that Jobs would have recognized those limitations and pushed for Mac OS programs to make their way over to iOS sooner. Particularly for the professional user, the lack of compatibility with, let's say, the Adobe Suite, Final Cut Pro 10, Logic Pro 10, and more make it challenging for the professional user to switch entirely to an iPad. It's getting closer. Adobe is developing their software for the iPad, but would we have seen more faster growth if Jobs were alive? And of course, we have to address Jobs' dislike for the stylus.
Who wants a stylus? You have to get them and put them away and you lose them. Yuck.
Many believe that the Apple Pencil wouldn't exist if Jobs were alive, but given how integral it has become for so many users, I think eventually he would have gotten on board. The Apple Pencil is such a strong creative tool, I can't see him not recognizing its utility, regardless of how he felt about the stylus on the Newton. But let's be clear, he definitely would not have allowed that original charging method with the lightning, you know what I mean. He covers a lot more in this email, and while it's impossible to say if he was for or against everything that he lists in the meeting outline, it's clear that he was forming an idea of what the future of computing was going to be and how Apple needed to position itself to stay on top. On some fronts, Apple has remained remarkably focused on the outline he put forth right here in this email. On other fronts, they have moved more slowly and gone off in different directions. Would Steve Jobs have been on board with, say, the Apple Watch? The watch is arguably the most innovative device Apple has released in the post-Jobs era, and it's likely he would have recognized that potential. I could even see a scenario where Jobs pushed the Apple Watch more rapidly to becoming a successor for the iPhone, where, instead of a handheld device, we have something on our wrist that has all those functions. Given his focus on the shift he saw coming in computing, it's certainly possible that the Apple Watch could have taken on even more a role in the future of Apple if Steve Jobs were still alive. Reading this email was an eye-opener for me. It showed me that Steve Jobs and Apple as a whole were already moving in many of the directions the company has taken in the ensuing 9 years. A lot of the agenda laid out here has come to pass, but there are also places where I think Jobs would have pushed further or harder to move Apple away from its computing roots, thereby avoiding the innovator's dilemma he referred to earlier in the email. Unfortunately, a year later on October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away, and the void he left at Apple has led a lot of people to conjecture, myself included, about what Steve would have done if he were still with us. In reading this email, I find myself somewhat reassured that the company has not drifted too far away from the vision he had for Apple's future. It's also possible we could be a lot further down that road if he was still with us. What do you think? Given this email, is Apple actually closer to the path that Steve Jobs laid out than we might have originally thought? I mean, this email has been out for a while. It's not new, but this is my first time reading it, and it's really given me a different point of view on where Apple was going at the time that Steve Jobs was still alive. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I think this is a really interesting topic. I'm looking forward to a boisterous discussion. If you like this video and you want to come back for more, then hit the like button, subscribe button, bell notify yourself so you know when more videos are coming out. And if you've been here before, thank you ever so much for stopping by. There's a join button down there if you want to immerse yourself more in the Painfully Honest ecosystem. Thanks so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. My name is Jason. This is Painfully Honest Tech. Tech so honest it hurts. Until the next time, I'm out.